Hello, everybody. How's it going? Woo! We're reaching the end. So, thank you. That's very useful. My name is Alex. I'm an activist from Toronto. I'll just give you a quick, really short bio. So, I come from the corporate sales world. I used to be can everyone hear me okay, by the way? It's not too loud, not too soft? No, okay. So I used to be a corporate sales director for the last 10 years. I was in sales management, and then about 9 years before that, I was working in sales. I used to run workshops, so some of the content that you're going to see here today, I used to basically teach people how to make a lot of money based on communication skills. And now I dedicate my time to teaching vegans and activists how to make a lot of vegans, which is way more rewarding and fulfilling. So I've been doing this work, full-time activism, for the last year and a half. And I started this specific organization, Amazing Vegan Outreach, earlier this year. This is probably about the 20th workshop that I've done. Now this one's going to be really short because we have about 45 minutes, although I've been told by Andrew that there's nothing after this. So I'm going to try, just to respect your time, I'm going to keep everything as best as I can within that time frame. But if anybody wants to stay later, we do have the space and we can go on to, I don't know, other topics and other questions that you guys might have. So the first thing I want to talk about is the fact that my outreach technique and what I teach people is based on a sales framework. And I know that word inspires certain thoughts and emotions in people, so I'm curious, and if you can just shout it out, what do you guys think about when you hear the word sales? Go ahead. Capitalism. What else? Pushy. Money. Yeah, TV salesman. That doesn't sound like a good thing the way you said that. Tony? Convincing, okay. Communication. These are getting a little bit more positive, but they're not usually associated with sales. How about manipulation? Yeah. So, pushy. I heard pushy as well. Pushy. Does that word ever get used to describe another group of people? Vegans, yeah. Why do you think that is? So there's going to be a lot of back and forth. Just yell it out, and if we do get into longer answers, Sky will kind of run the mic around, or if you're right beside Sky, you can just grab him. But why do you think it is that we get labeled as pushy? Because we are. Okay. Because we're passionate? Yeah. What's that? Targets. I'm talking about like vegans and people that talk about animal rights. But yes, salespeople do have to meet targets. What do we have to meet? What do we feel like we need to meet as vegans and activists? Our conscience. That's a really good point. Yeah. So we kind of have this drive, I think that's maybe even more powerful than sales targets, which is the need to do something right and good and share this message that we all know, right? Just by show of hands, I see some anonymous hoodies, so I'm assuming the anonymous hoodies will put their hands up for this one, but how many people here do regular street outreach, like go on the streets and talk to people? And keep your hands up. Raise your hand if you, at any time, have talked to friends or family about veganism or animal rights, which is also a really important form of outreach. So I'm looking at most people in the room. Some hands at the back there coming in, yeah. How many people here have managed the really easy, simple task of veganizing their entire family? Really? Good job. One hand, eh? Good job. What is it that makes it so difficult? We've all tried, or most of us have tried, I'm sure. What is it that makes it so difficult, do you think?
We're related to idiots.
You have the hashtag truth bomb. What do you think? Yeah, there's that bias, there's that ego that kind of comes up that makes it harder, I think, for people that you're closer to accept that message. And I want to talk about something that I hope will help that. I'm going to start off with the hardest stuff and then move into the easier stuff. But I want to talk about the difference between process and content in our outreach conversation. So, coming from a sales background, probably the most important thing that you start off with as a new salesperson is product knowledge, right? You'd study, you'd learn about your business, about your products, your services, your industry, what's trending. And often people say, okay, I know what I need to know and I'm ready to go, and off you go. You get on the phones, you start calling people and telling them about your about your business, about your services. Has anyone here ever heard of, any Canadians in the house, by the way? I'm Canadian. Yeah. Have you, Almira, have you ever heard of Marshall McLuhan? He's not that well known, but he's a Canadian philosopher who dealt with kind of communications. And one of the things that he said, one of the phrases that he coined, is the medium is the message. So has anyone ever heard that phrase before? The medium is the message? Okay. So maybe if you've studied communications, although this is a Canadian guy who maybe is not that important. But what that means is that whatever message we're trying to convey is inextricably linked to the way that it's conveyed, so that the medium, the way that it's being conveyed, actually becomes the message, is so important that the content of the message is secondary. And that's what I want to talk about in this workshop, is the process, the way that we actually communicate all the knowledge that we have, because I'll bet everyone in this room could be considered a vegan expert. I'll bet you guys all have, whether you're vegan or not in this room right now, you have so much knowledge just from being here this weekend, more than almost anybody in the world, that you could do really, really good. You could probably come up here and give a talk to a room of non-vegans and tell them a lot of really good info. And that's a really good thing. When we get down to the one-on-one conversations, I want to talk about some things that really help in a sales environment where we're full of product knowledge, and now we need to try and get this person to actually accept that and then link it to what's important to them. We've all heard this. We've all heard that people who are not vegan share vegan values, right? They already have the vegan values. We just need to help them align their actions with their values. We've all heard this, right? I'm assuming most of us have heard or some iteration of that. How do we do that? That's the trick, because if we could snap our fingers and do that, just help them align their actions with their values, then we're good. We don't necessarily need to feature dump. This is what salespeople do when they're new and they don't really know the process, is they start feature dumping. So they just start telling people about all the features of their product and service, and they sound like a pushy, manipulative infomercial. And in this day and age, anybody that's curious about veganism can go online and they can research all the stuff that we can tell them, right? So this workshop, this is more of a talk today, but this stems from a 2-day workshop that I deliver around the world. So that's what I do. I travel around and I do this 2-day workshop. And it used to be called customer-focused selling when I was delivering this in the corporate world. I rebranded it. I think Melanie Joy will be proud of this, whose talk I think is either right now or it was just happened. But and it's called Carnist-Focused Veganizing. That's the best I could come up with. And is there anyone here who's not familiar with the term carnism? I just want to make sure that I'm not. Okay, so in a really quick explanation, carnism is the belief and the reality that eating meat is natural, necessary, and normal. It's that belief. Melanie Joy has an amazing TED Talk on it. I believe it's one of the most watched TED Talks ever. So you can always look up carnism, TED Talk, and it'll come up. And so it's not meant as an insult, by the way. A lot of people kind of laugh. It's, this isn't meant as a derogatory term. It's just a really clear term as to why people consume animals and animal products. All of us in the room, I mentioned, are vegan experts. So we know and we can describe the ethical issues with consuming animals and animal products. We can probably rhyme off quite a few environmental benefits of being plant-based, being vegan. And there's a lot of health benefits that we can probably talk about as well. So this is where the product knowledge comes in, and I strongly urge all of us to become experts as much as we can be in these different aspects. So has anyone here read Earthling Ed's ebook, the 30 Excuses ebook? Yeah? Was anyone here for George's Carnism Debunked talk today? Fantastic talk as well. Tons and tons of useful knowledge, and we have to have this knowledge. So once salespeople, when I was training them, once they'd have all of their knowledge training and we got to the process of how to deliver that, I would tell them to forget all of it. Put it aside. You have that now. We are experts. Now is the time to focus on the person who we're trying to influence, who we're trying to persuade. I like to say, and you'll hear this a lot through my talk, that we're trying to coach. So my approach is all based on coaching. And I'll ask you guys a question, and maybe this is a good, Sky, a good chance to use the mic. If somebody wants to put your hand up and tell me, what do you think is the difference between coaching and teaching? Right there in the back. Oh, sorry, we have someone with a mic, so just behind you there.
Okay, so for me, coaching would be taking something from the person that you're trying to convince and then bringing them to their own conclusion more than bringing them external arguments to their ideas.
Absolutely. So you can keep the mic, so who is the center of attention in a coaching situation?
It's the person that's being coached, not the coach's ideas, or it doesn't really have anything to do with it.
Mm-hmm. And vice versa, who's the center of attention in a teaching situation?
It's the teacher's approach that matters.
Yeah. It's the teacher, it's the person who's actually talking, right? So, if you think about coaching someone on a golf swing, for example, the first thing that we want to do, if we're going to coach someone, if let's say I were to go coach someone on a golf swing, what do you think the first thing I'm going to ask them to do is? Yeah, show me your swing. Let's see what you got. I could teach them all about the golf swing, but that might not be the most effective way to help them improve their golf swing, right? So there's a really interesting saying which this whole concept is based around, which is people are usually more convinced by reasons they discovered themselves than by those found out by others. A really simple way to remember that is people believe what they say, not what they hear. I'm going to repeat that. People believe what they say, not what they hear. And that's the tricky part, is how do we get people to say what we want to say, right? We want to talk about veganism. We want to talk about all these amazing things. We want to help them make these connections. What process do we use to allow them to come up with their own conclusions? Ed talked about that in his talk briefly. Phenomenal talk, by the way. He talked about that, helping people make those connections, right? The Socratic method, which is, it's amazing. This coaching framework employs the Socratic method a lot because it's all about question asking. So I'm going to go through a few things. I chose 2 things to talk about from the full workshop. The first one is this, and I bring this up because it's super important. The building rapport stage, which I think that we may sometimes forget about when we're talking to people, when we're talking to friends and family, when we're talking to people on the street. And I think it is the most important of all of them. This is my analogy for building rapport. Think of rapport, that relationship that you have with that person, as a bank account, or we'll call it, let's say, a trust account that starts off at empty when you approach that person. And from the moment that that person is aware of you, you have the opportunity to start making deposits of trust into that account. The reason why that's really important that we do that well right from the start is that we all know that in these conversations, there's going to be moments where we disagree with each other, right? That's inevitable. When that happens, we may have to make withdrawals from that trust account. And if we've done a lot of things to build up that trust, that conversation and that relationship that I'm developing with that person can sustain that stress of that disagreement. When we haven't done that, and if you watch YouTube videos of people doing outreach conversations, the times that those conversations turn into arguments or debates is because of that, is because that bank account either didn't get filled up quickly enough or too big of a withdrawal was made, and it ruined that rapport that's necessary for a coaching type of relationship. So I'm going to start this little section with a riddle. If you've seen this riddle, please don't participate. I know some of you have seen this. Here's my request. At the end of this riddle, I promise that everybody in this room will get the answer. I will promise you that. If you do get the answer quickly, just put your hand up in the air and keep it there. I just want to see how the room fills up. And please do not resist the urge to turn to your neighbor and tell them the answer and explain it to them, because it will all be explained. I promise you that. Okay? So here's the riddle. There are 30 cows in a field and 28 chickens. How many did not? So if you already knew the riddle, don't put your hand up, because then I just want to see as people in the room get it. Did not what? That's the riddle. So I'll say it again. There are 30 cows in a field and 28 chickens. How many did not? Cool. See some hands going up. I'll say it slower. Maybe it's the Canadian accent. I apologize. So there are 30 cows in a field and 28 chickens. How many did not? I love the smiles that people get on their faces. So just keep your hands up. Someone that knows the answer definitely. What is the answer? 10, right. Now for those of you who don't have your hands up, I'm going to help you out. There are 30 cows in a field and 28 chickens. How many did not? Right, so 30 minus 20 is 10. Cool. So I know, it's not a very vegan riddle, but I didn't write it. It demonstrates something really important though. It demonstrates the 3 V's of communication, which are visual, vocal, and verbal. These are the things that everybody uses to perceive what is being communicated. When you started thinking about that riddle, what most people do is they listen to the verbal and they start thinking about it on a verbal level. What are the words that are being said? And it's impossible to solve that riddle if you're thinking about the number 28, because that's what you're hearing. What I did the second time and every time after that, I spoke slower, I enunciated better, and I put emphasis on the 8 and leaving a gap between 20 and 8. And that's why you saw some of the hands going up, because people started hearing the vocal inflection or whatever I did with my voice, which helped them understand what I was actually saying. But there was no doubt, or at least very little doubt, I hope, in the room, when I showed the visual example of eating. It's the best eating I can do. And everybody got it, right? So there's a professor in UCLA, his name's Albert Mehrabian. He did some research, and he found that, as best as he could figure out, these were the percentages. I'll read them for the people who can't see in the back. 55% visual, 38% vocal, and 7% verbal. It's a really low number on verbal. Just to clarify, his research was specifically on people's interpretation of emotions and feelings, and so when people were trying to express that, anything that wasn't congruent, people valued the visual over the vocal and the vocal over the verbal. All I mean to say by all this is that when we are talking to people and we're outreaching and we are genuinely trying to help them and come from a coaching, supportive perspective, not a judgy, pushy, whatever, stereotype that people have of vegans, we have to make sure that these things are fully aligned with the message that we're delivering, that we're trying to deliver. So I just want a few examples from anyone in the room here, especially those of you who do street outreach and who do anonymous cubes. That could be anonymous, Earthlings Experience, iAnimal, virtual reality, which is phenomenal. Lots of different outreach styles, but if you guys can just share, what are some visual things that you try to do to make sure that people are perceiving you as non-threatening, as friendly? What do you do to build rapport? So right in the front.
Nodding.
Nodding a lot. What does nodding do?
It gives them a sense of, okay, I hear you, like I listen to you.
Yeah, it makes them feel heard. You're affirming the fact that you're listening, that you're paying attention. Love it.
Smiling.
Smiling? What does smiling do?
Smile is a signal of welcome.
But we're talking about animal rights here. Animals on the screen are being slaughtered. Is it appropriate to smile?
It depends. It depends on the situation. So if you really show them the footage and talk about that, you have like a probably sad face. But as soon as you start to ask questions and get some great answers, smile. It's like
Absolutely. That was a trick question, by the way. Smiling, I'd say 90% of the conversations that I start are with a big smile on my face. I want this person to know that I don't mean to judge them, I don't mean them harm. I tend to wear the shirts that represent the actions that I'm doing. So if I'm going to a save vigil, I'll wear a save shirt, anonymous, whatever that is. And cubes are great. I'll smile and say, hey, do you know what this is? I don't know. They're usually confused, right? I step back and say, this is a group called Anonymous with the Voices. I show them the hoodie. I smile as I'm explaining that because immediately we're going to get into that really horrible footage, but I want to start it off on a positive note, right? So smiling is really important, yeah.
Mirror whatever they do. So
Mirroring, yeah.
the language they use, the tempo they speak, the voice, how loud they speak.
Yeah.
If they have their hand in their pocket, put your hand in your pocket, just match what they're doing, and they don't know why, but they're gonna feel connected to you like this.
Yeah, I don't know if everyone can hear, so mirroring, if you're matching some of their body language, some of their intonation, their pacing when they speak, their language. People tend to like people and trust people who are more similar to them. So anything that you can do while it's authentic. So I need to take a quick second here to make sure that we understand that everything that we do in these interactions needs to be authentic. We should never do anything that feels forced or fake because people will see right through that. It'll ruin rapport immediately. So be your genuine self and allow yourself to emote, to feel, to show. If you're happy to meet someone, make sure they feel that from you, they don't just hear it, right? That's really important that those things are aligned, otherwise they won't believe it necessarily. Tony.
While doing outreach, don't stand in front of them, but stand beside them and to watch together the footage. First, of course, to know what's actually on the screen, and second, okay, I'm standing here with you, talking about this, and I'm not talking against you.
Yeah, so what Tony's saying is body position, where you physically stand. There's a lot of conversation that has gone into this, but I'll just say the general one, what I tend to do most of the time, is aligned directly beside them, facing the cube of truth, if that's what we're in. But anytime you can align yourself with someone, whether it's a sales interaction. Anybody here work in sales, by the way? A few people. Soul-sucking job. No, I'm just kidding. As long as you're selling something you believe in, it's horrible to sell stuff you don't believe in. But anyway, if you're aligned with that person and you're looking at this problem together, it feels like you're working to solve it together as well. So I definitely believe in being as aligned as possible. And that goes for sales interaction as well. If you can stand side by side or sit as close to the same side of the table as opposed to directly across, it helps. Anything else visually that we can do? David.
Yeah, when they're speaking, an open body language, like hands behind your back, and make sure it looks like you're paying attention, like visually, not that you're just listening.
Yeah.
Eye contact, hands behind your back, open body language.
Yeah, just making them understand that you're actually listening, that you're interested in what they're saying. So an open body language, which means you're accepting of what they're saying. You're not closed off. You don't have like a weird kind of grimace on your face or something. I don't know. So genuinely interested, kind of combine that with a head nodding, with a little bit of smiling. Like, these are gifts. So this is a little bit of the philosophy behind this, but every time that I get to speak to someone on the street, every time that somebody stops at a cube of truth, I'm grateful for an opportunity to spread that message, to spread that vegan message, right? So if I go into this conversation with already being grateful that I get to talk to this person, that they, how many people walk by and don't care and don't stop? I also don't blame them. Maybe they're busy, they're going somewhere. But if someone gives me time, I'm grateful for that time. So make sure that they feel that from you at every moment, even when, we're going to get into the objection handling part, but even when they start throwing things at you that you disagree with, that's part of the job, don't do outreach if you're going to be surprised by someone saying plants have feelings. It's going to happen a lot. And then all we need to know is the framework, the process on how to deal with that, any objection. So what else? A couple other things that we can do visually. Lockie.
I find like when you're really passionate about something, your hand gestures sometimes tend to, your palms are facing down or your fingers are start to point.
Mm-hmm.
So I always put my palms open if I get a make hand gesture.
Yeah, so what Lockie's saying is open palms. There's been research that's been done that shows that especially, the research I heard was about public speaking, that public speakers, when they have open palms, are viewed as more credible. I don't know who thinks of these studies, but somebody's got to earn a paycheck at a university, I guess. So I go with that, you know. I learned that actually in a workshop. Someone told me that, and I stopped pointing at the screen, and I just used an open hand. Still directs their attention. And all these little things that we do, if we do something quote unquote wrong, if we cross our arms, if we don't smile enough, well, but let's say we point at the screen, it's not necessarily going to ruin this conversation. But sales and outreach, and by the way, if you don't think that outreach is sales, it's exactly what it is. Like outreach equals sales. We are trying to get people to connect, right? Values and attributes. I'm not going to go too deep into that, but it's what we're trying to do. So if we can get them to, I lost my train of thought because I went on that tangent. Oh, right. So if all these little things, if we do them well, there's a quote out there, great things are just a sum of little things done well. That's what great things are. And the reason why some people have really great outreach conversations consistently is because they're doing all these little things really, really well that add up to higher percentages. So nobody's going to veganize 100% of people they talk to, but you'll have people that have higher percentages. Why? I honestly don't believe that people are born salespeople or born being good communicators. I wasn't. I learned a lot of the stuff that I implement through the last 19 years in my professional career. So this is all learnable. You just have to practice it if you believe in it. Now, I will also give you the little caveat. If you don't like some of the stuff that I'm teaching that works for me, that's totally okay. But I do recommend going to find a framework that resonates with you so that you have a plan, you have some sort of an action plan when you are approaching these. You can self-assess, you can try to figure out, watch a video of your outreach or record yourself with a cell phone and listen back to it. And if you're on your framework or off your framework, it can give you clues as to what might not be working if you're struggling, if you're getting into debates and arguments, as opposed to kind of productive veganizing conversations. So when we do a really good job, let's say, I'm skipping a lot of the full workshop, obviously, but I want to focus on objection handling because I think it's the biggest fear and the biggest struggle for salespeople and for outreachers is getting objections that we can't handle well. It puts us on the spot. Ed mentioned it earlier. The worst feeling is getting something, not being able to deal with that properly, and that person leaving maybe more convinced of not being vegan, right? And that's like a crappy feeling. We're trying to do the opposite. So when you ask someone directly at the end of a fantastic outreach conversation, will you go vegan? Can you see yourself going vegan? What's the worst that can happen? No. People will say no to you, so we should never be afraid of getting no's. That's part of the process. I do recommend asking people very directly, if you have a card on you, hey, if I gave you a card with some information on it, would you go home and maybe watch a documentary? I can recommend one for you based on what we were talking about. And get a verbal commitment, get them to say yes, so that, not for you, for them, so that they're committed to going home and watching that. But if they say no to going vegan, what is that usually followed by? Yeah, a why, which salespeople would call an objection. I'm going to show you 7 steps. Now, 7 sounds like a big number, but when you actually put them into practice and when you see them happening, it's almost hard to count all the steps because they happen really, really quickly. They're really, really important. And people have asked me at the end of this, if I don't have time, what steps can I cut out? I'll let you guys answer that. I'm going to show you the 7 steps and see if you guys can figure out what steps are easily removed. I actually can. So the first step is just listen. When people are objecting or when they're giving you information that you disagree with, this is a gift to you as a coach. This is them showing you what their obstacle is that they need help with overcoming so they can go vegan. They don't know that. But as a coach, you're getting that view of their golf swing where you notice the club is all messed up over here, which is why it's slicing out over there. So listen really intently to what they're saying. Don't interrupt them. It's not a debate. You don't have to speak over them. Listen. Then, when you've heard what you've heard, acknowledge what it is that you've heard for 2 reasons. One, it will ensure that what you are perceiving is actually what they meant to communicate. I can't tell you how many times I've tried to acknowledge, like, okay, so what I understand is this, and they say, not really, and then they explain what they meant by what they were saying. Or they hear it back, and they're like, well, no, not exactly, and then they'll actually clarify their objection. What that does is it saves me a heck of a lot of time as a coach, not addressing the wrong part of that swing. It also makes them feel really understood and really heard. And that's just like a 1 sentence, 1 little phrase. So if I'm understanding, so for example, somebody says, yeah, you know what you're saying makes a lot of sense, but I just love the taste of meat. Okay. My acknowledgement to that would be something like, okay, so if I understand what you're saying is you feel a need, I think like most people do, to enjoy the food that you're eating, right? And maybe you're worried that if you considered going vegan that you might not enjoy the same foods as much, or you might not enjoy the pleasure that you get from eating. Is that right? They're going to say, yeah. Or they're going to say, well, that's not exactly what I meant. Let's just assume it's the yes on that, right? So I'm interpreting what they're saying, and in the acknowledgement phase, I always want to relate it back to the values that they've expressed to me throughout that conversation, right? Because you guys know when you ask someone, how does this make you feel? They're going to tell you, sad, bad, or mad. Kind of 3 typical ones. But they're going to tell you stuff, and I mean, you can explore that with questioning. Once you've done that, when you start getting into the objection handling steps, remember to link that, right, to what we're trying to do here, connect them to veganism. So you're afraid that if you went vegan, protein. So if I understand you correctly, you're worried that if you decided to put an end to this, or at least to exclude animal exploitation from your life, it might have a negative health impact on you. Is that what you're saying? Right? I'm showing them very clearly what their obstacle is. And they're going to say, well, yeah. Empathize with them. Empathize, you guys tell me, what does empathizing do in this process? What do you think it does? Understanding, connection. Yeah. First of all, this isn't going to be an argument. I know how you feel, and you can do that 2 ways. You can empathize in 2 different ways. You can empathize through personal experience. So if you've felt that way before, I mean, I'm not a professional athlete or a bodybuilder or anything like that, as you can tell. But, so I can't say the whole protein thing, yeah, I had the same concern when I went vegan because I didn't. So I wouldn't make that up. Again, be authentic, be real, never make stuff up. But if I want to empathize, I can easily empathize with other people's experiences. So I've talked to a lot of people who have had that concern, right? So I can tell that person, hey man, you know what? I've talked to a lot of people who feel the same way. They're worried that, they think this is wrong, yet they don't want to have a negative impact on themselves if they do something about it, right? So it's totally understandable. And they're going to feel understood. Now, we're in step 3 here. We've started answering this objection, and we haven't disagreed. There's been no reason to disagree yet up until this point. And there's another point here, step 4, asking them questions to better understand their objection and to help them come up with their own solution to their objection. We can't possibly disagree on anything unless I misunderstood, and that's a good thing if they clarify the acknowledgement stage. But now I'm going to ask them questions. So for example, let's go back to the protein one. And I don't want to get too specific into individual objections because I think George did a fantastic job of kind of hitting off all of these different, carnism myths and that sort of thing. I want to focus on process. So I'm just going to use that one for an example. So if it's the protein one, I might ask them something like, so I'm curious, what do you do now, given that you're an athlete, to make sure you're getting enough protein? How do you track that? How do you measure that? I'm going to find out what they're currently doing, right? And then when they describe that, maybe they have a meal plan, maybe they have a coach, who knows, however they track their protein intake, their macros. That's a word I learned it from bodybuilders. I don't know really what it means, but anyway. Then I'll ask them, well, let me ask you a question. If tomorrow you made the decision that you wanted to stop contributing to this, I will always refer back to what's in here, the values. If they said something in that conversation, I'll refer back to that. But let's say, you want to stop funding this horrible industry. how could you make sure as an athlete you are getting enough protein? I'm going to ask, I could tell them, I know what they could do, but people believe what they say, not what they hear. So just ask them, what are you currently doing? What have you done in the past to solve a similar problem? Hypothetical, what could you do in the future? If you made this decision, don't underestimate the power of hypotheticals, especially in this scenario. People will go there most of the time if you lay it out for them. So listen, if you decided one day to do that, how would you go about making sure that you were enjoying the food that you ate? If it's the, I love the meat, I love the taste of meat type of thing. So they're going to give you some answers, and you're going to just ask questions. Be genuinely curious to understand where their objection is coming from. Why do they think this way? Ask them those questions to get to the root of that, because then when you reiterate back to them kind of what they've said, again, I'm just using an example here. Let's say they say, well, I track my protein. I have an app. Let's say that I track on my phone. I also get nutritional advice from my, from my trainer or something like that at the gym. Cool. So, you mentioned that if you did decide to go vegan, you'd probably do some of those similar things, right? Would you be open to having a conversation then with a nutritionist, maybe even one that trains plant-based bodybuilders or athletes, right? Would you be open to having that conversation? And if you did find out that you could be just as fit and healthy, or maybe even healthier, because I know some athletes are going vegan for the health benefits, but let's say you decided that you learned that, would you then consider going vegan to end all this? Do I come across as pushy in any of that process? So after reiterating, I'm going to present that solution. Whatever, I'm going to work with whatever they said. This is also an opportunity for me as an expert to share what I do know. So don't feel like they have to come up with every solution, because they might not, right? That's the reality. They might not come up with the right solution. And that's where you can say something like, hey, you know what? Somebody else that I talked to thought about doing this. Or have you thought about doing this? I mean, you can throw out some solutions in there and then close off that objection. Once you've gotten to that point, they've come up with some ideas. Just ask them clearly, yes or no, do you think you could do that? If you went home tomorrow, would you do that? And they'll commit to it, or they'll give you, usually what happens, is they'll say, well, yeah, I could do that, but, and then they'll just give you another objection. Totally cool. That's just another hurdle that they have to get over. And, to me, that is time really, really well spent if you're going through this type of objection handling versus a debate back and forth where people are normally just digging their heels in and they don't want to be wrong. So that's where they make those illogical, ridiculous statements that we've all heard, right? Where it's like, how dumb can you be? They're being intellectually dishonest to protect their ego and to make sure that they don't feel like they're a bad person. So understand that that's normal for us to do. So I really want to get away from us mocking and judging and laughing at people for having these reactions, because it's totally normal. I probably would have done the same thing if I were in their shoes 7 years ago. So I know it's a lot, and I know it takes a lot of practice, and it doesn't necessarily always go perfect. It doesn't always go perfect. Picasso said, learn the rules like a pro so you can break them like an artist. And I believe that to my core when it comes to anything that I'm doing. If I want to try and master something, I'm going to learn the framework, the rules of that, and then when I'm actually doing that, I'm going to tweak it, and you can't help but tweak it. I'm curious, what questions do you guys have? Comments, questions, agreements, or disagreements? I didn't do anything. Which let's open this up to dialogue. What do you guys think about this framework? One, have you ever seen anything like it? And can you see how it might help turn debates into kind of constructive coaching opportunities? I saw your hand first, so if Sky, you want to grab the mic, and then Tony, you can be after.
I've come as a media, I feel fairly sorry.
Welcome, thank you for coming.
But I met some people outside of Tesco and they were showing me about what happened. And they were so kind and nice, so they didn't make me feel that I was judged and made me feel welcomed. And I went away and I cried, and honestly, they were the best people I've ever met. They were so nice, and I am changing.
Wow. That's amazing.
I felt guilt when I talked to them, but they made me erase the guilt and told me how I could be different.
Yeah.
So they say, don't ignore the past, it's okay. What can you do in the future? And they were just so nice,
Yeah.
so persuasive.
That's amazing.
Just so kind. And then, yeah, honestly, it's not what you thought vegans were, because as a meat industry, oh, vegan, sorry, you did.
That's what I thought. I know what you're talking about.
The vegans I've met are not like that. You do stereotype, and every single vegan I've met, I've been so wrong about that. I mean, because my friend's vegan, and she's the nicest girl I've ever met, and nothing gets shoved down your throat. It's sorry.
Hey, first of all, like, good on you for coming here. Like, that's seriously, that already shows.
Good on you.
What's that?
Seriously, good on you. Like, you do become like blinded because everything's normal. It's just normal to be like that. And then, like, when I'm watching the videos, I'm actually crying about how, well, I feel stupid, but how it's shadowed and it should be. You do need to speak.
Listen, you, obviously, it's already here, right? So my question to you is, knowing what you know, and trust me, I think everybody in this room has been in your position, right? We all have been there. Absolutely. Yeah. We've all felt that. So my question to you is, what do you see as the hardest thing for you to overcome if you want to try and put an end to all that, guilt that you feel? What's your biggest obstacle to going vegan?
Change my eating habits. So for me, normally, I am obsessed with protein. So for me, normally, my breakfast is eggs on toast. What do I have is a good source of protein now. The thing is, I don't know. So
listen. No.
I will learn.
I'm not judging at all. The funny thing is that you sound like probably most of the people here. I've had well over 1,000 conversations with people on the street about this topic. And the hardest thing, you've actually hit the nail on the head. It's not about enjoying my food, because most people, if you've had any of the vegan food here, right, that's not actually the hardest thing for people. The hardest thing for people is to break habits, because habits are, they keep us locked down into what we do.
And it's in the social situations.
Can I ask you a question? Have you ever had a habit that you've worked to change in the past?
Yeah.
I mean, you don't have to share it, the actual habit, if you don't want to share it, but can you think of the steps? Like, how did you go about breaking that habit?
Well, I've been on Facebook for a week and a half. It's damaging to me. I spent too much time, I waste too much time, and I've been off it a week and a half and I've never gone back.
You can help me get off Facebook, maybe, because it's...
It's 4 days and 5 days Cardiff. It got easier every day, and now I don't care.
Okay. And so how did you do that?
Just delete it. Just said, I have enough.
Wow. Now, do you think that would be too difficult for you to do with veganism? Is that too big of a stretch?
You can see it in a way, every day is a new day. You're only grinding 2 days, so don't think about 40 days, don't think about 80. All you've got is today.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. So look at it in that perspective, then it's a different way of looking at it.
Let me ask you a question. If I gave you a card that had a website on it, have you heard of Vegan 22? It's funny that you brought this up. Perfect timing for this workshop. By the way, and I hope you don't feel put on the spot, thank you for contributing. Did you guys notice I did the 7 steps? Did you guys notice that? Did you feel it?
It's addiction.
So I just did the 7 steps. Now I'm gonna present the solution to you, which is this. The solution is this. There's a website called Vegan 22. It's a challenge. You can sign up on there. It's totally free. You get a mentor. That mentor, there it's on that card. Thank you. Teamwork. That mentor will actually guide you through 22 days. They say it takes 21 days to develop a new habit, to try and basically break that addiction or start new habits that'll help you get rid of that guilt. Would you try that? Can you see yourself trying that at some point? Boom. There you go. That is we didn't plan that, right? That wasn't planned. We don't know each other. That seems like a magician just like, That worked a little too smoothly. Thank you for being here. Thank you for, no problem. Thank you very much for kind of going through that little exercise with me. But I hope that shows you guys that is what a supportive objection handling looks like, and it's a coachable moment because you came up with your own ideas of how to do that, and I just supported, I facilitated that thought process for you. So that's 7 steps to objection handling. I'm going to finish off with one quote. What time? Is this pretty? Yeah, it's not bad. Okay, so I'm going to finish off with a quote. This quote I really believe in. So it's Archilochus, a Greek poet, said, "We don't rise to the level of our expectations. We fall to the level of our training."